So we need to talk a little bit about the social model of dyslexia. Very quickly, what is the social model of dyslexia? Well, without going into too much detail, it's essentially the model that those of us with dyslexia suffer not because of the dyslexia, but because of the way that society is structured, because of the way that education is structured, and because of the way that the world is essentially unfair to us. And therefore, that those of us with dyslexia, it's not to be seen as a disability, it's to be seen that the world is disabling. Well, that's fair enough. That's a very broad understanding of the social model of dyslexia. And here's something positive to say about it. It feels great. Subjectively, it's very positive. And it stops the blame. It stops the responsibility. It stops people blaming those of us with dyslexia for getting things wrong or for perhaps not succeeding at school. I mean, here's a perfect example. When I was at school, I was the bottom of the class in just about everything. I was held back a year twice. I left later than all my friends, having scraped a handful of O-levels in those days. And actually it wasn't fair, because it wasn't that I wasn't clever necessarily, it was that the teachers hadn't taught me. It's that the education system wasn't fit for purpose. I was collateral damage. And so this is where the social model of dyslexia comes in handy. A bit of a negative, however. When we talk about the social model of dyslexia, we're implicitly saying that there is something challenging, something, as it were, disabling about dyslexia. Otherwise, there's no point in talking about it. We don't talk about the social model of being white, necessarily. Or, if we do, it's from a critical race theory perspective. White people don't talk about the social model of being white. Men don't talk about the social model of being men, because there's nothing to explain away societally. So when we talk about the social model of dyslexia, implicitly we're saying that there's something to explain away. So if you're going to go down that route, then fair enough, because many people describe dyslexia in terms of deficit, in terms of weakness, in terms of deficiency, and that's okay. But the social model of dyslexia implicitly talks about the social model of a disability in that respect. There's another problem with the social model of dyslexia, which is that it doesn't take into account necessarily the lived experience of dyslexia. So one of the things about dyslexia is that there are emotional repercussions of having dyslexia, emotional manifestations. Executive function involves, as one of its aspects, often, although not always, executive function involves let's say poor emotional regulation or challenges with emotional regulation. That is, being able to pinpoint emotion, identify emotion, name that emotion, reframe that emotion, control that emotion, etc., etc. And so the social model of dyslexia doesn't take that into account, because there are lived experiences of depression, there are lived experiences of people suffering, there are lived experiences of true emotional pain that the social model of dyslexia seems to sort of blame on society, but it just doesn't seem to fit. Another thing we need to be careful of course, is that the social model doesn't take into account the realities of certain aspects of various family members. So let's take, for instance, I'm dyspraxic. It doesn't explain away why I'm dropping a kettle of boiling water on my feet every couple of weeks. Society doesn't cause me to drop a kettle of boiling water on my feet. Society doesn't cause me to misjudge the speed that the car is driving towards me. Society doesn't cause me to choke when I try to swallow, when I try to drink water or something. It doesn't cause me to choke. These aren't social issues. So this notion that the society is to blame for the challenges just doesn't seem to fit reality. There's another aspect, of course, which is that, as something I've discussed in another video, everybody, to some extent, can be put on some form of disability spectrum. So it's not that there's perfectly able and perfectly disabled. Perfectly able is, omnipotent, God, that kind of thing, and perfectly disabled is dead, or something along those lines. Everybody has challenges, and we shouldn't be binary about this. And so the idea of saying that, the social model of dyslexia says that, we're not disabled. We dyslexic people are not disabled. It's a society that disables us. But actually, every single one of us, in one respect or another, suffers what you might call a disability or a disablement within life. And it's not necessarily society's fault. I think one of the problems I have with the social model of dyslexia is that it just feels like it's blaming. It feels like one of these models that says, nothing's my fault, it's all somebody else's fault. Now, maybe that's not fair. Maybe that's not the intention of the social model of dyslexia. But it often feels like it's the outcome of the social model of dyslexia. It feels like the outcome is that those of us with dyslexia might be able to say, look, it's not my fault, it's somebody else's fault. And that just doesn't feel comfortable for me. The idea of blaming people, blaming society, it just feels disempowering. And there's something that I don't like about this notion of disempowering myself. If other people feel happy by doing that, that's okay. But personally, I like to challenge this social model of dyslexia. I've talked elsewhere about the concept of bi-ability, the idea that in some instances I may be looked upon as slightly disabled, and in other contexts I might be looked upon as somebody with great strengths. Now, if we're consistent about the social model of dyslexia and that my disabilities, as it were, my challenges are somehow society's fault, then we also have to say that my strengths are society's fault. So it's almost as though we're taking away all agency from the dyslexic person herself. That, yeah, okay, so that the challenges are not the dyslexic person's fault, but neither are the strengths? Or is it that the challenges aren't our fault, but the strengths are? That we have inherent powers and the challenges are social constructs? Because that just doesn't seem consistent. And it's this consistency that I'm interested in. So that's just a couple of thoughts on the social model of dyslexia. You may not disagree. This is really about opening up the conversation. But if you do want to talk about it, drop me a line and perhaps share this video, and we'll see how many other people agree that the social model of dyslexia is perhaps not the right way of looking at it.